Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and in this video we're breaking down Season 3 episode 4 is now out, and throughout this video we're going to be going through it all. As always, we'll be giving you a breakdown of the episode alongside the comics. Hit the thumbs up if you enjoy it, and make sure you subscribe for videos like this every day. With that out of the way, thank you for clicking this. Now let's get into the episode.
Viltrumites. At long last, my thirst for battle can be satiated.
Okay, so up top, as always, I want to give you a rundown of the issues. If any of you pick up the comics and just want to dive straight in where the show starts off, then for this episode we have issue 54, issue 55, and also 57. However, as always, things are jiggled about and we actually get a lot more focus on 57 first. Beyond that, there's a brand new scene involving Ray and Rex. Ray was a dude in the comics, and beyond that, he got killed by Komodo Dragon. So everything beyond this with Rex is brand new, including the spark between the pair. Obviously, he used to be with Eve, and he also dated Duplicate. So Guy's got a habit of ending up with teammates, and it seems like they're taking him in a brand new direction, which I actually think is a great idea considering what's to come. Having Ray as a new character also adds in some extra insights that we never got before. Learning of her parents, it's clear she was trained as a soup from a young age. It reminded me a lot of Starlight from The Boys and also Gen V. A lot of the female characters had restricted diets due to their parents. In Gen V, we had Emma, who had similar powers to Ray, and she could shrink down or grow really big. However, this was triggered by how much or how little she ate. So she gained an eating disorder, and I do wonder if they'll add more of an explanation to Ray's powers. She also says she doesn't know how to cook, so her parents likely controlled her meals. She just wants to do something normal though, like buy groceries and make a meal, and it shows how sheltered her life's been, which is a great addition for the show as they never had any of this in the comics. It also kind of highlights how much their powers have pulled them away from normality. They can't even identify between a zucchini or a cucumber, and they should have just asked your mum. But what this highlights is some of the thematic elements in the show. Because these kids have been raised as heroes, they've never had the chance to learn these things. The focus has always been on being a hero, and that's at the cost of a normal life. I think it's something you could definitely apply to Mark, but he at least had, a couple of years of normality. Who hasn't though is Oliver, and he's basically becoming like the child star that never got a childhood. He was thrown right in at the deep end, and because of this, he's already killed. So it works brilliantly to highlight how they'll never have normality. Now in the background, we see a bus pull up, which shatters all the hopes of having this. I love how Rex sparks up the crunchies, and I got a lot of vibes of Gambit when he sparks up a playing card. Unfortunately though, this just highlights there's no chance at a normal life. I love the sigh of deflation from Ray, and she realizes it's never gonna happen. They'll always be pulled into these fights with these random bad guys because that's the way the world is. In the end, when she's back at the base, she just orders in pizza, and yeah, I've been there to be fair because I can't cook either. Now this video is sponsored by Factor. Love is in the air for Valentine's Day, but this year I had to have it early. I'm working Friday shooting some Bond stuff and going to Cap 4, so me and my wife had our Valentine's Day on Wednesday. And I have to be honest, I have no idea how to cook. However, I saved the day with Factor, who offer nutritious, no-hassle prepared meals that save you time and money. With Factor, their no prep, no mess meals means it's easy to meet your wellness goals just in time for summer. Their chef-crafted meals are ready to eat in just 2 minutes, so no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy these nutritious, great-tasting meals. Factor is so flexible as well, like I can easily adjust my order size, enjoy it with loved ones, or even skip a week when I have a special event. With 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every single week, you'll always have new flavors to explore from breakfast all the way to dinner. Factor saves you so much time, and because of this, you can put time into more important things. Me and my wife, we don't really get much us time because of the kids, but this just saves us a ton of time making meals. We don't have to go to the store, and they don't take long to cook, and it really makes a massive difference over time. Factor is the go-to lunch and dinner solution, and viewers of the channel can get an amazing offer. Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use the code 50spoilers to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor box. That's code 50spoilers at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Factor's no hassle prepared food. Make sure you always have something nutritious on hand when you don't have time to think about making a meal. So go to factor75.com and use the code 50spoilers to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Thank you. Now from here we jump to issue 57 with Robot's investigation on the drone. Discovered last week, we had Angstrom Levy spying on the house. This scene's all pretty much the same, except Oliver was there in the comics. He ended up playing video games with Rudy and Monster Girl, but I think his removal's there for a reason. It's all tying into that theme of normality and how Mark's still hesitant about having him involved. Now due to the self-destruct, they can't really see who created the device. It is from Earth, just not this one, which they don't figure out. Now Mark first suspects Cecil, and it's easy to see why too. It makes sense he'd be spying on his family, as he's probably done it a million times before, which I actually think Mark was aware of. Like, even the house across the street was a base for the GDA, so his suspicions are easy to understand. However, it's not him. What we get though is a big scene from the comics where Mark storms the Pentagon. However, we do have some differences, including Cecil not messing around. In the book, he only confronts him, whereas here he just sets off the device. He's clearly not taking any chances and wants to show he's still in control. The comics also end differently. In the work, he asks Mark for a favor and Mark cautiously agrees. This then takes him into a side story, which is a crossover involving the Astounding Wolfman. Launched by Image in 2007, he was obviously a play on the Wolfman. Now his absence here I think comes down to the rights. Last week we talked about how Britt was absent from the Cecil episode, whereas he was a big part of the comics. I think that if Kirkman uses them in a show, it means that Amazon gets the rights to it. I'm not 100% on that, but I'd imagine there's something along those lines. Anyway, Mark believes Cecil and the pair leave on pretty frosty terms. I love how we end confirming that Cecil is actually spying on him, just not through that device. It just works really well to pit the pair as enemies and adds so much tension to the scene. As Mark flies out, he looks at his phone and we can catch Seon's dog being used in the background. This takes us to the date with Eve in Paris, which goes down in issue 54. Like Nolan and Debbie, they can do wherever, but it's always going to have something cause issues. On the date with Nolan and Debbie though, we watched as he refused to get involved. Guy was like, my shift doesn't start till 7, and he was completely apathetic. However, in the comics, Mark feels compelled to. Here though, he is resistant to the idea and he ends up being kidnapped. It again hammers home the idea that he can't have a normal life. Eve is clearly resistant to it as well, and in the comics, she doesn't stop the twins with her powers. Mark ends up going with them willingly, which really annoys her. Here though, she seems a bit guilt-tripped by it eventually and is a bit shocked Mark doesn't want to go. Starting off though, I think her putting up a literal wall here highlights how she craves normality too. So it builds brilliantly off the scene with Ray and just hammers home that point. I was actually surprised how early these guys showed up, as in the comics it was a couple more issues after they raided the museum. Saying they need help overthrowing their king, we eventually learn that this is the Immortal. On the way though, we also get a funny moment where Mark from the future pops in to grab his clothes. Say funny, we'll see how dark it is later on. I always love this moment in the comics though, and it was so good seeing it on screen. Seeing an American flag, the way this is laid out, may be a reference to the Marine Corps War Memorial. Obviously I'm British, you may have figured that out, but if it's a reference to something else then let me know below. Now in the show, we get way more of a backstory to the Immortal as well. In the comics, we don't see the Immortal's takeover and we only end up hearing about it. Here though, it's all played out and it highlights how he became the ruler of Earth. In his past, he lived throughout time and had been several prominent figures. This even included Abraham Lincoln, so he has led in the past. So you can see why Mark would even feel like it's fine to leave Earth in his hands. As we learn, he and his family have left, and since then things have gone to ruin. Immortal's madness has turned him vicious and cruel. When reading it, I always felt like it was King Lear or some old classic Roman Caesar. Creating a dictatorship with slavery and camps, he ended up destroying the world. It's kind of like your Invincible Days of Future Past, and it tells the tales of rebellion. Now ironically, in Mark defeating the Viltrumites in this timeline, it's ushered in something worse. There's not really any great way to play it though, as we know there's other timelines that are much worse off as well. Failing to assassinate him with a phony legend about the Declaration of Independence, they've then gone to Mark. In the comics, they just get taken into custody immediately, whereas the show has them drawing in the robot gods. Mark then fights them hand to hand, which is a brand new scene for the show. However, we get the line in both where Mark asks if the king's a Viltrumite. They respond by saying they don't know what that is, which kind of plays into how they were defeated. Now though this is different, the following scene is almost exactly the same as in the comics. Their Immortal's speech isn't as emotional, and instead he just explains his apathy, talking about how he's lost everyone he cares about. His immortality's actually been a curse. Throughout his life, every woman he's ever loved, every child he's ever had, they've ended up dying. So over time, you can see how he just think what's the point? It's a similar thing that also happened with the Viltrumites. They age slower the older they get and can live for thousands and thousands of years. So they don't even mind conquering planets, as they view the people there as fragile. Even if you think about where Oliver came from, the Thraxans have a lifespan of 9 months. If we rule there, we'd probably also hit a point of thinking, what's the point? Immortal's overjoyed and happy to see him though, because he knows he can finally end the pain. Unfortunately though, he doesn't realize he's from the past and instead assumes it's the version that left him. Now, he also asks if he's sick. We will talk about this line later in a spoiler section, as it's a big thing that could ruin the series. However, I will discuss it later on and obviously give you a heads up before we hit that section. Either way, Immortal explains how Mark was an emperor who then put him in charge. Immortal didn't want the responsibility and he was ready to move on. A line that I'm so glad they brought across was also the Immortal forgetting Kate's name. I remember reading that the first time and it being such a massive gut punch. In Mark's time, he'd just seen them get engaged, whereas Immortal doesn't even remember who she is. It's a devastating reveal about the character, and yeah, it hit me just as hard as the first time I read it. Now, the show also adds in a scene of the twins' escape. We never really see how powerful they are in the comics, and I feel we needed to see this because, you know, you need to explain how they managed to lead a revolution. We also never get the scene with the levitation, and the Immortal never attacks the twins. Instead, Mark just kills them for telling him too much about the future. This includes him being an emperor, which he takes as him accepting his role as the Viltrumite emperor. We'll talk about that later as well, and though the Immortal already talked about that, I think if we go further into it, it might ruin it and you might rip my head off. The channel's not called Absolutely No Spoilers for a reason. One very small added detail is Immortal asking Mark, how many must die for your mistakes? This is a common theme throughout the Invincible series, and I really appreciate they added it in. That was a point TJ brought up as well, my mate TJ, and again, shoutouts to him for getting all the comic panel images so we could get this breakdown out as fast as we could. Give him a follow, yeah, he's fat though on Twitter, give the guy a follow. In the comics, the twins just come across Mark having ripped off his head, but I loved all the additions here. It further highlights how when it comes down to it, Mark will kill if he has to. It's a real moment of maturity, and we see as the robots announce the transfer of power. We end with him taking his clothes, and yeah, always love the way they wrapped it up, especially because he's now got to go back to the date, and yeah, bit of a vibe killer. This is still in issue 54 though, and the date's along the same lines. However, he doesn't tell her about Immortal in the future. What I love about this addition to the show is it allows Eve to reflect on her future version too. Realizing they can change their fates, it adds a bit more of an optimistic outlook. Mark's still torn up about killing him, but it also allows him to realize he shouldn't be a tyrant. In the comics, Mark realizes they should just make the most of the time they have, as he's now seen firsthand what loss can do to a person. Mark's obviously going to have a long lifespan as well, and I think he saw himself in the Immortal. So it's a great bit of character development, and their date goes across the world. In the comics, they don't return the Declaration of Independence, but I like they added it here. The work also had a big splash page with basically a collage of their date. Here we see it all playing out scene by scene though, and it's a great reflection on their relationship over the past years. Just like the comics, it ends with the pair in the air and Mark telling Eve he loves her, which is when we cut to the credits. And I also checked my watch and I was like, I wish every hour of my life was that fast. Would have helped a lot with Madame Web. However, this is just like it was with Amber and Alan. In both, we cut away from their love scene to go to the Viltrumite prison. Issue 55 actually opens with Eve and Mark going to bed, and that then takes us to the rest of the story. They completely nail Alan's intro, and him being cross-legged with the shackles is a page that gives us the book's title. Here it's presented like a video game, or like I don't know, like an 80s TV show. Giving us a brief recap, we see his battle with Anissa and the fact he made her bleed. In the comics, it was his fight against Nolan and also the torture devices on the ship. Alan's also going to be a key cog in the fight. You should definitely keep your eyes or eye on him. Now, after the recap, it's almost exactly the same as how it is in the source material. However, there's a major difference. In this section of the comics, Nolan's always part of the plan, and he even sends Alan a signal to kick things off. Nolan shows confusion over the feelings for his family, and he questions his existence as a Viltrumite during the flashback sequence. Going along the corridor in the comics, he then says it's time. That's when Alan rips out of his chains, whereas here he says, goodbye my friend. Nolan's resigned to his fate here, and Alan has to rescue him. Rereading it though, I did wonder if that's what it fully meant, as we did have a Viltrumite say it's time to Nolan when he goes and gets him, and then Nolan repeats it on the next page. So maybe he was just repeating it, but I always took him as being part of the plan due to what he says when Alan later arrives. They also torture Nolan and bring up his unapproved breeding. Now this is actually about the Thraxans, as the Viltrumites were actually encouraged to breed with species that look like them. The beat up also looks like it's ripped right out of the comics, but Nolan welcomes his punishment. He's reached a point of enlightenment and actually pities the others for never getting to feel that. The escape is also much more planned out in the book. There Alan has specific steps which include Step 1, cause damage and trip the alarms. Step 2, free the prisoners. Step 3 is scan the prisoners, and in doing that they'll find someone strong enough to help. That is of course Battle Beast, and it's so good seeing him back. Though he was barely in season 1, he made a massive impact. I remember reading the comics and the grin across my face when he showed up. The show handles things slightly different though, and when the prisoners escape in the comics, they just stand there in shock. They also don't attack the guards, and Battle Beast is much easier to recruit. To be honest though, I love the slow reveal here and also his holdings. There's clearly like a need to rush this, but the guy's just loving hearing the idea of a challenge. Here though, Battle Beast and Alan almost duke it out, and the structure collapsing is what gets them in the torture room. Now in the comics, Nolan never saves Alan's life. I think this was a great addition though, as it showed he wasn't willing to let harm come to those that he cared about. Literally breaking the chains of the Viltrumite Empire, he's standing up to protect his friends. Though he doesn't care about his own life, he does care about those around him. Now the fight then pretty much plays out how it does in the comics, including blowing the airlock. The head crush is also exactly like how it is there. Smashed his head like the like button. I also love how Battle Beast and the Viltrumite guard just float away into space, probably fighting forever. It was nice seeing you while it lasted. I obviously know what's coming down the line, but yeah, great little cameo for the entry. Now we also get an additional scene that shows how important their friendship is. This scene doesn't happen in the comics at all, but I feel like it adds a lot. Alan comes from a race that was once enslaved by the Viltrumites, but the fact they can work together says a lot about him, and also a lot about how much Nolan's changed. At one point he would have looked down at Alan and not really seen him as someone to be an equal to. However, he's now put that to the side and actually turned against his own people. So it's really important that he's standing up to this symbol of oppression alongside someone who was oppressed. No Viltrumite would put their neck on the line for another, and it sort of lays the groundwork for why they're going to lose. Now speaking of Bond, James Bond, we see Mark bonding with Eve and Debbie banging on the door. This is exactly the same as the comics, and it's the last page that comes from issue 55. It's a great way to top off the episode, and that's probably my favourite from the season so far. I love the Cecil one as well, but this recaptured one of my favourite moments from the comics and actually improved on it. The Immortal in the future scenes been something that's always stuck with me, and I actually thought they might skip it. To me, it wasn't necessary to the plot when I first read it. It was just like, you know, a cool adventure. Seeing how much they added here though, I can instantly see why it was crucial. Now going forward, I do want to talk about some major spoilers that the Immortal alluded to. Obviously, if you want to duck out, I appreciate you staying with us this long, and hopefully I see you next week. Heavy spoilers ahead though. Anyway, just to cast your mind back to earlier, the Immortal asked Mark if he was sick again, and then said he thought they'd found the cure for it. Now this is actually a nod to the Scourge virus. Capable of killing a Viltrumite, it's a powerful virus spearheaded by Thaddeus. It's something that decimated the Viltrumites in the comics and basically whittled down their numbers. Because they'd already had 50% of the planet wiped out in a combat competition, this was absolutely devastating. This is why they had to resort to the softly conquering approach that Nolan did. In the past they just rock up and invade, but now they just didn't have the numbers. So they had to infiltrate, create offspring, and then go from there to try and build out their numbers. This is also the closely guarded secret that Nolan touches upon. Their numbers are so low due to the virus and their losses, they just can't really provide a proper counterattack. The bodies of the dead actually lie on the planet of Viltrum, and it does look like Saturn. Looks like that when you first see see it, and then you see the horror of their bodies. So the virus is completely devastating, and they have it as a reminder, like, we're very close to losing it, but we must fight back. Now, General Craig sort of confirmed they'd be going this route pretty soon. In season 2, he turned up with a fake eye, which he actually lost due to the virus. If we cut back to earlier in the series, we saw a flashback on Beltrum. There, Craig still had his 2 eyes, so it kind of teased what was coming. Now, as for the Immortals saying Mark's family can endure, this is also a reference to Eve. Again, big spoiler alert, so heavy spoiler you could say. So if you don't want to know what happens with her, then I recommend you turn off now. Are you still here? I'm glad you are. Those other guys sucked, mate. They were bringing down the vibe. They weren't hitting the thumbs up like you were. Obviously, Mark lives a long time. From what they know, Eve doesn't, but the pair still grow old together. They have a kid, and she keeps on aging, while Mark remains relatively young. On her deathbed, she then says her goodbyes, and everyone around her gives her a tearful farewell. However, it turns out her body actually regenerates due to her ability to manipulate atoms. So she ends up going back to how she was, which kind of plays into the Immortals saying Mark's family can endure. So Eve's basically immortal too, and that's something they'll likely do down the line. Anyway, that wraps up the video, and huge thank you for coming along. Please drop a like and comment with your thoughts on the episode below, and let me know what you think of the season so far. Can't believe we're like halfway through it already. Did you know as well that members of the channel also get early access to videos? If you click the join button, you get at least one breakdown a week before anyone else. It all goes towards helping breakdowns like this get made, and we've set it at a price at 99 cents, where hopefully it's not a lot to you, but if a lot of you do it, then it will mean a lot to us. Now, if you want some t-shirts and merch, we've also got a store right below the video. Let you pick up all kinds of cool tops like our Theory Time one, House of Dragons stuff, Marvel tees, and a lot more. Huge thank you to everyone who's picked one of those up as well, and yeah, I'll see you next week. Now, if you do want something else to watch, mate, which you bloody what else are you doing? Yeah, go check out our breakdown of the first 3 episodes. You probably missed it. I don't know how many people watched it, but yeah, go check it out right now. With that out of the way, huge thank you for sitting through this video. I've been your host, Paul. You've been the best, and I'll see you next time. You take care. Peace.